Hello everyone, welcome to NCERT 6 to 10 class in short. We are discussing grade 10 history section 1 events and processes, chapter the rise of nationalism in Europe, chapter 2 the making of nationalism in Europe. In the previous video we have discussed how did the idea of nation state came into being. Today we are going to discuss what did liberal nationalism or nationalism stand for. We are dealing with liberalism in the political sphere as well as in the economic sphere. First, liberalism in the political sphere. Ideas of national unity in early 19th century Europe were closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. Liberalism comes from the Latin word liber, which means free. For the new middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality for all before the law. Politically, it emphasized the concept of government by consent. Thus, we can say nationalism had its origin from liberalism. Since the French Revolution, liberalism had stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges, a constitution and representative government through parliament. 19th century liberals also stressed the inviolability of private property. Yet, equality before the law did not stand for universal suffrage. Suffrage here means the right to vote. That means the term suffrage means right to vote. In revolutionary France, the right to vote was exclusively granted to property owning men. Men without property and all women were excluded from political rights. Under Jacobins, only for a limited period all male enjoyed suffrage. However, under Napoleonic court went to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of a minor subject to the authority of fathers and husbands. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. So that was about the liberalism in the political sphere. Now, when we come to the liberalism in the economic sphere, liberalism stood for freedom of markets and abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. This was a strong demand of middle classes during the 19th century. There were many restrictions in the movement of goods and capital from one place to another during the 19th century. So, people demanded against it. For example, in the first half of the 19th century, in German-speaking regions, Napoleon's administrative measures had created out of countless small principalities a confederation of 39 states. Each of these states had its own currency, weights and measurements. As each states have their own currencies, measurements and weights, it was very difficult for common merchants to carry their goods and capitals from one place to another. For example, a merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg, we can consider, to sell his goods have had to pass through 11 customs barriers and had to pay a custom duty of 5% at each one of them. Duties were levied according to the weights and measurements of goods. As each state had its own currencies, weights and measures, this involved time-consuming calculation. Also, it was a heavy loss for the merchants. For example, the measure of cloth was the LE, which would measure 54.7 cm of cloth in Frankfurt, 55.1 in Mainz, 65.6 cm in Nuremberg and 53.5 cm in Freiburg. So, according to the places, the measurements also differed. Such conditions were viewed as obstacles to economic exchange and growth by the new commercial classes. They argued for the creation of a unified economic territory allowing the unhindered movement of goods, people and capital. The commercial classes found it as a tedious task and hence the people demanded liberalism in the economic sphere also. In 1834, A customs union of Zollverein were formed at the initiative of Prussia and joined by most of the German states. The union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. This was actually a positive side for the commercial classes as their demands were considered. Furthermore, the creation of a railway network stimulates mobility, harnessing economic interest to national unification. Thus, a wave of economic nationalism strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at that time. Thus, we can conclude nationalism or liberalism stood for freedom of political rights as well as freedom of economic rights, that means movement of goods and capitals from one place to another. That's all for today. We will be meeting in the next video. Until then, bye and thank you.